Hi, everyone. Katie Anderson here, and I'm thrilled to have Jamie Flinchbaugh to talk about his amazing new book, People Solve Problems. And it is a great book. I was reading it this week and diving in to all of the lessons and years of wisdom that Jamie has distilled into this great guide about solving problems and moving away from tools to really focus on the principles and the leadership behaviors it takes to both solve problems and then coach people to solve problems too. So I'm excited to talk with Jamie today about his book and one of my favorite topics, which is problem solving, and to share also, if you stay to the end and you're watching this in real time, a special giveaway we have for you about Jamie's book. So welcome, Jamie, to my author interview series.
Thanks for having me. Glad to talk with you. It's you don't always get to talk to people that problem solving is one of their favorite topics. But I know the spirit with which you think about that topic. So I think this will be a fun conversation.
I'm really excited to dive into it. And problem solving really is a favorite topic of mine, and it's also been an Achilles heel because I love solving problems, and yet I also needed to learn how to not always be the problem solver. And that's some of the questions I want to dive into with you here today too. But first, let's get started for everyone listening or watching about what inspired you to write this book in the first place.
Well, first of all, it's been 15 years since my last book, which is The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean with Andy Carlino. So part of it I was just due. But I'll say two things really came together. One, writing for me is always a process of discovery, of articulation, of refinement. So I write as a way to help shape my own thinking. And so this was an effort to do that. Second is the number of conversations I've had over and over again about problem solving, the mistakes I'm seeing people go after, and essentially what I saw was a lack of maturing of the body of knowledge, that I didn't really see it moving forward. And so I thought perhaps throwing these topics out there would shake up the conversation, shake up people's thought process, and help move us forward in the domain of problem solving.
That's super great. And one of the things we have like a shared understanding of is that people often get too focused on like the tools of problem solving and not necessarily the behaviors and the mindset and the process that the tools support. So you did a really great job in my mind of walking through that in the book as well. There's a quote in the middle of the book that actually, I'm assuming, inspired the title of the book. It's "Problems do not solve themselves. Systems do not solve problems. People solve problems. This requires that people, in the face of many other pressures, take the initiative and ownership to push things through and solve those problems." Great quote. And this is actually something that I ask leaders all the time in either workshops or when I'm coaching intact teams too, about what are the barriers that keep people in their organizations from taking that initiative and the ownership of problem solving in their organizations. And I want to ask you that as well, like in your experience in working with hundreds of different companies around the world, what are some of the barriers that you have observed that have been these barriers for problem solving and people taking initiative?
Well, I think for one is the focus on the outcome. Of course, we're not solving problems just to solve problems. We're solving them to produce results. So certainly the outcomes matter, but sort of pre-assessing where you're going to end up and determining whether you're going to be successful in doing that means that we kind of ignore the journey and the process. And I think that's the part you got to kind of fall in love with is the process, the thought process, the creativity that goes into it, and then let the outcomes be what they are. Of course, they still matter, but when you start jumping ahead to the outcome too quickly, you lose the desire to wade into the deep end of problem solving itself. And so we don't value that, we don't reward it, we don't allow it, we don't give permission for that. We get so focused on the outcome And that becomes I think one barrier. I think a second big barrier is sort of getting stuck in process and templates. What's the right way to structure it? What's the right format? Who's going to look at it? What's the right word, or how to use that tool? And those are just guides, right? Those are just things that are just meant to help you. And to say that there's a right way is kind of a problem. So if people don't have confidence that they're going to use those things the way they're supposed to, it's kind of easier just to stay out of it altogether. It's easier to stay on the shore than to jump in the water. So those are probably two of the biggest. I think the third is that to do problem solving well, you have to admit up front you don't know what you need to know. And that's a difficult admission for a lot of people, myself included. And you just have to live in that. That's why the learn deliberately is such an important behavior. Because if you don't basically say, I don't know what I need to know about this, I need to think about it harder. If you don't acknowledge that, then you're not problem solving. You're just jumping to solutions or trying to match them up.
Yeah, so true. I agree with you on all those fronts. Asao Yoshino, who is the 40-year Toyota leader, is the subject of my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, and actually taught John Shook himself how to do A3 thinking, which is one of the very popular problem-solving tools in the lean world. He's said to me multiple times, A3 is not a magical tool, and it doesn't matter about the template. It's about that thinking process and how we're learning how to be problem solvers.
Right.
So great. You talk a lot about some great structures and examples of how leaders can also be coaches of problem solvers. One of the things I have observed, and actually it's one of my challenges for myself, as I mentioned, when I became moving from I love solving problems to helping other people solve problems, is to break my own telling habit, jumping in with all of my ideas and sort of taking over the problem solving. What's one suggestion that you have for leaders in sort of navigating this continuum between asking and telling, and when they should be the problem solver and when they should be coaching other people to be problem solvers?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is just sort of deliberately check your intentions before you go into any of these conversations. I actually have sort of separate set of notebooks for people that I coach, and I pull those notebooks out for those conversations. And one of the reasons for that is that pulling out those notebooks is a mental check for myself around what am I trying to do in that particular moment. So I think that's really important. And when am I the boss? When am I a teacher? When am I a guide? When am I a coach? And just taking a moment to check your intentions goes a really long way. Otherwise, you bounce around and you muddle these roles and you do all of them poorly. So I think that's important. I think the other factor in making that distinction is being really clear about what do I care about more? Do I care more about the result, or do I care more about the person's learning? And there are times where absolutely you're going to care more about the result, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then don't coach, right? Then get the problem solved, take ownership, make sure things happen, make sure but you care more about it. You're not going to allow the learning to occur if it gets at all in the way of the outcome. And so, this is a long-term versus short-term factor. So you need to be able to think long-term to even make that distinction, because the learning, the coaching is always a long-term factor, always a long-term trade-off. But again, sometimes short-term matters more. And, so I would say, when the pandemic began as an example, how we should all react, and, people that had to switch from home, putting safety measures in place, that wasn't the time to, learn and experiment and, let people flounder around and struggle. You kind of need to make some decisions, put some solutions in place, and move quickly. So learning where you stand with those trade-offs is pretty important while you're checking those intentions, having that balance.
Great description. And I agree 100% with everything you said. one of the things I talk about for leaders, building on this word intention, is how do we take an intention pause, even just those like 10 seconds between meetings, to say, what's my role or my purpose in this upcoming interaction? Am I the problem solver, or am I the coach? Or do we need to just get to the answer right now? Or am I here to show up to allow for some learning? And then we can align our actions better. But we're so reactive because we're moving from meeting to meeting and things feel urgent that we, as you said it really well, we like muddy it all up and actually are ineffective in doing all of it. So I really liked your explanation, Jamie. I'm going to move on to the fourth question, and another quote here too, that cultures may be built accidentally, but then you will not get the culture you want. Building the culture requires deliberate action on the part of the leader to generate experiences for people. I love this quote. I think it speaks so much to this concept of deliberateness and also generating experiences for people and those structures and systems that allow them to learn. So again, what is one of the most important deliberate actions that you coach leaders on that they can take to generate learning experiences and start creating this culture?
Well, I think, the important thing is that the day-to-day interactions, right? So this is the accidental culture. Leaders sometimes fail to appreciate the impact that they have, right? It's like every word that you say, every reaction to an email, every email you decide not to respond to, that's an experience. And that's how we end up with the accidental culture. So to me, the everyday, day in, day out sort of signals are pretty powerful, pretty impactful. And so I think the two that really go the furthest from a consistency and from an opportunity standpoint are the questions that we ask and the things that we say good job and thank you for. So finding good questions that come out through everyday conversation, that I can just have those moments to highlight a certain way of thinking or a certain response to something. Those questions are almost always things that force people to go back into their brain, which makes it more of an experience, right? So when you ask a really good question that forces someone to go, that is triggering how they think, and that's going to ultimately impact their culture. So if you have those questions ready, use them over and over again, they're going to have an impact. And then just the everyday, what do you say good job for? Oh, thank you for that. Good job to that. Those little everyday recognition moments go a long way. And again, you want to pick the things that aren't going to show up once in a year, aren't going to show up at recognition time or reward time. They're going to show up within a conversation. You can say, oh, thanks for that. Thanks for bringing that up. That's really great. Those are really high frequency signals that we can also use to help shape the culture.
Absolutely. That's like the caring aspect. So like be both caring and curious. And how can we too, that you mentioned recognition. I also like to think of that, like recognition is, you've achieved something or you've done something good, but really this concept of appreciation. I appreciate that you're trying this or you're going forward, and back to that sense of humanity. And I think there's a nice nuance between those two words. And what I feel like a lot of what you're talking about here is how do you show appreciation for the people on your team and acknowledging the effort that they're putting in. So really great suggestions there. And those are simple things. Those are not like, you don't need a huge, complex system or training to do this. It's these small things we can do each and every day to intentionally shape that culture. So talking about problem solving, I want to know what you think or consider to be the biggest problem with problem solving in the organizations you work with.
I would say one of two things. One's more of a macro, one's a micro. On a macro level, it's just the idea that we can get better at problem solving. I think we often take it for granted. We think it's just a matter of raw intelligence plus experience, and it's not, right? That's just not enough. And so just this idea, this thing that we've been doing since we were infants and that we learned how to do in school and learned how to do through experience, that we can get better at it. And so just acknowledging that or failing to acknowledge that, I think is one of the biggest problems with problem solving. That's why we don't spend more time on how we do it and how we get better. On more of a micro level, I'd say it's problem statements. It's amazing. Not everything has to be an A3 or an 8-step or a whatever, right? Sometimes you're just having an email exchange about something to do, but you still are solving a problem in most of those cases. So whether it's an everyday email or it's an A3 or it's a big strategic gap, not being clear or not articulating the problem statement and ensuring some alignment, it's just amazing how much we take that for granted. And so many times I'll say, hey, ask everybody in the room to write down the problem statement and then share it. And none of them will be the same. So clearly it's not so obvious to everyone. We think, oh, the problem's obvious. Well, it's not so obvious once you ask people to write it down and articulate it. So I think just not taking any action until you're clear what problem you're trying to solve, I think is probably one of the most consistent, most common problems with problem solving that I see everywhere I go.
Yeah, I have to agree with you too. We lack clarity and we jump right to solutions and action. So we need to spend more of that time understanding what's the problem we're trying to solve. In fact, that's one of my favorite questions. What's the actual problem you're trying to solve? And all these ideas that you're hiding as a solution or the actual problem, like what would actually be solved? So you have some really great examples and explanations about that in the book, especially around how do you develop a problem statement and what does a problem statement actually mean? So great resource in here for the book around that as well. So I want to switch into something about the process of book writing. As an author myself, this has it's become more intriguing for me about this, but what's something that you learned personally about problem solving through the process of writing this book?
Well, I think probably scoping is a big deal. The scoping of problem solving, scoping of projects, and sort of always checking in with that. I had an outline of a book actually on this wall of windows I have in my office, all Post-its up, and if I would have written that book that I first outlined, it'd be 850 pages. It would have been quite the thesis, but I didn't know where I was headed. But I also didn't know how to get started in refining the scope without jumping in, without getting the ball rolling. And so the scope changed twice in a pretty major way. Once after I started writing the process and realized that it would be a way too long of a book, did I rethink the scope. And then after the first draft of the full book, and I kind of went back and gave it some new structure, a new flow, some major adjustments to the core themes. That was another, I'll say, major scope adjustment. But the idea that can we get the scope right before we start, or do we going to have to check in with that scope as we go forward and adjust thoughtfully, but still adjust on the fly as we go forward? That was sort of one where, if you consider writing a book a problem-solving effort of its own right, the one where my content and my process intersected.
I know, I think that's great, using the book writing process itself as an example of problem solving. And this, and a problem that we have in problem solving is like, what is the scope of our problem? Are we biting off too much that we can't actually ever make progress on that? In my own experience then as an author too, I had the exact same experience. The book that I set out to write, I mean, in its essence, those elements were there, but the structure and the way it came about shifted several times and was very different. And I had to get started and just go through that messy experience. And actually, that's a really nice parallel to what problem solving is. It isn't a linear, you don't just like start with the background and go to current condition and what's my target. You have to go through this messy, iterative thinking process when you're problem solving too, and you learn by doing and get more clarity through the actual actions. And so that's like those tight plan, do, study, adjust cycles, or as I like to say, study, adjust, plan, do. All right, great. Well, we're going to come on to my last question that I love to ask, which is, what is a question that you haven't or are not usually asked about the book and by me or anywhere else. What is that question and what's your answer?
Well, I feel like I've done enough interviews that I feel like I should have written all the questions down and seen, look for the consistencies, look at what's missing, and because there's so many good questions. But I think one question that I haven't gotten is what topic that's in the book do you wish you had spent more time on? And because as I said, there's a lot of stuff I didn't get to that I originally intended to. And there's a chapter and the first chapter of the last section is the role of the leader as a system architect. And so I clarify what that means and what are some elements of that. But honestly, that, coaching was originally just a part of the role of the leader, but it got its own section because there's so much to say. I feel like I could have, should have, I don't know if it matters, but I definitely could have done that same thing with the system architect. What are all the elements of designing your locally appropriate system to manage, to refine, to focus your problem solving efforts as a team? Again, I set up the tone of its importance. I talk about a couple of elements, but it could have been its own section. It could have been its own book. And
Yeah.
I find myself talking about it enough with my clients that I kind of wish I had written more about it in the book at this point.
Well, there's always another book out there, Jamie. So I know there's always needs a little space between the books, but I hear some passion behind that for you as well. I had Karen Martin, who's also been one of my author interviews. She's written a number of books, including Clarity First, which is one of the books I did an interview with her on. So go check that out if you're listening here. But she gave me good sage advice. She's like, your book's a moment in time and your thinking is going to move beyond once you hit publish, and just let that be okay. You can always write another book. You can always do something more, but just let it be that moment in time. So, but yeah, that's a great question. I highly recommend everyone watching here, grab a copy of People Solve Problems, regardless of the methodologies that you use for problem solving, the tools, the approach. This gets to the fundamentals about how you should be thinking about solving problems, some real tangible practices that you can incorporate into your life at home and at work immediately, and some thinking too about what it means not to just be a problem solver, but a coach of problem solvers. And as Jamie talks about, how are you the system architect for building this problem solving learning culture in your organizations? So check out a copy of Jamie's book, People Solve Problems. And if you are watching this right as this interview comes out, Jamie has kindly offered to partner up with me to give away 3 copies of his book to readers in the United States. So click on the information here below to register for that giveaway. And Jamie, where else can you find copies of your book?
Well, Amazon is always the easiest place to find it, but also at jflinch.com, we have a book page, and you can find lots of places to go buy the book from there.
Okay, great. And I'm going to do a little plug for my book too. If you're looking at some of the other fundamentals about what it means to be a leader, coaching others for problem solving, and some of the history about how Toyota developed its own problem solving culture and the essence of the fundamentals behind the leader's role in coaching and problem solving, check out my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, Lessons from Toyota Leader Isao Yoshino on a Lifetime of Continuous Learning. I think that they're nice compliments because Jamie gets a lot into the how, and this is sort of the history and the philosophy behind it. So go check out our books, and thank you, Jamie, for being here. What are other ways that people can get in touch with you as well?
Well, jflinch.com, they can contact me that way. And on LinkedIn, Jamie Flinchbaugh. I think I'm still the only one with that name on LinkedIn.
Yeah, lucky you.
Having a unique name. So
I'm Katie Anderson. So there is not a lot of uniqueness there, but everyone who's listening to, if you're not already following me, please connect on LinkedIn, Twitter, and my website, kbjanderson.com. And of course, my YouTube channel, if you're watching this as well, go ahead and subscribe, because we're going to have more author interviews and tidbits about problem solving, leadership and coaching and more. So thank you again, Jamie.
Thank
for
you.
coming and talking with us about people solve problems.
Thanks.